Hello everybody and welcome back one more time to The Witcher 2. As usual, before moving on to the next game, I want to give my final verdict on this game and discuss a few things that I liked and that I didn't like. And I loaded an old save for this. As you can see, I am back in the forest of Flotsam at the Elven Ruins. And this is actually shortly before you make the decision between Yorveth path and Roach's path, which is why Zoltan is standing over there. I specifically saved this save file so that I could replay the game on Roach's side without having to play, the whole intro and first chapter again. But I figure this is a good place to have our final discussion because, it's nice and beautiful and we won't get attacked by monsters here, I think. So, yeah, let's use this place to talk a little bit about the game. As usual, I will probably mostly focus on things that I didn't like. That's probably even too strong of a word because I really enjoyed this game. But there are a few things that I think could have been better, and it's more interesting to talk about them than just say, everything was great and everything was fine. There wouldn't be much to discuss if I, just focus on the good parts. But still, let's start with the good things, I guess. First of all, I think we can all agree that in terms of, the technical side, this game is much, much better than the previous one. It looks really gorgeous. Just look at this place. It's really, really beautiful and it's really atmospheric too. And I really liked, just looking at the game because it was so beautiful. I especially like, what they did with the lighting. You always have those nice god rays shining through the foliage and whatever. So the design and the graphics of this game are definitely much better than the previous one. And I already liked the previous one. I thought that, for its age, The Witcher 1 actually looked pretty good. But, this is quite obviously an improvement. And the gameplay as a whole was very much improved. The combat was like miles better than in the previous game. I would say there aren't many things that I would criticize about the combat system. It was, fast, and it was fluid, and it was fun. Maybe two minor things that I would point out. I already spoke about how I felt it was kind of necessary to force you to take the potions before the battle. That was just, an annoyance. I didn't feel that it added any strategic depth to the game, because with some minor exceptions, you didn't really know what sort of battle you would get into. So in the end, I just, tried to guess, this could be dangerous now, so let's take a few potions now. And I really only took the same 3 potions every time, because those were potions that would work in any situation. I didn't use any of the more specialized potions, because I didn't know what fight I would get into, so I didn't know what kind of potion would be most useful, so I just took the most general ones that would always work. I guess the system works better if you have already played the game, if you know what to expect, and if you maybe play on a higher difficulty and you need more specialized potions to win a battle. Then I guess it makes sense to, plan ahead, sit down, ask yourself what potions will I need for the coming battle, and then, pick the proper ones. But for a blind let's play on normal difficulty, it was just, okay, there may be a battle coming up soon, so let's just take some random potions and hope for the best. So, yeah, I don't know, it felt an unnecessary complication to have to drink the potions before, the battle started, when you didn't know when the next battle was going to be. Not to mention that very often taking the potions wouldn't actually help at all, because before the battle you had like an extended cutscene or a dialogue, and by the time the battle started your potions have worn off. I mean, I could have used some talents to increase the potion length, I suppose. I didn't really go into the alchemy tree, but you get the point, I think. So, I don't know. It's just a minor annoyance, but I felt it was unnecessary. And the second thing that I thought could have been better, I felt that the sword fight was a little bit, I don't know, unbalanced. I mean, they gave you the ability to block, which was nice, but blocking cost you 1 point of vigor. Which, especially, early in the game when you don't have that much vigor, is actually quite a big deal. So, it feels like very high payoff to just, block one enemy blow. So when I was, in a sword fight, I could choose between using 1 point of vigor to block one blow by the enemy, or I could use the same amount of vigor to use a Quen and be protected for, I don't know, a minute or so. So it felt very pointless to use the block in the first place, since it was too costly. There were a few occasions where I was trying to get into some good one-on-one, simple, honest sword fight with somebody else, another enemy who was using swords and not magic and whatever. And I just tried to have a sword fight with them. But it didn't really work out because, after blocking 2 or 3 times, I was out of vigor, and being out of vigor means that you do less damage as well. And, I mean, you could parry, that was a nice thing, but it felt that the sword mechanics were kind of useless if you didn't use them in combination with signs. And usually it was just easier to use a Quen to protect yourself instead of blocking, or use an art to, throw the enemy off instead of parrying or whatever. So, yeah, I guess I see their point. They probably wanted you to use signs, they wanted you to use the combination of signs and swordplay. But you know me, I like sword fighting, so sometimes I really just wanted to have sword fight with an enemy and just, parry and block and whatever, and I don't know, it was just so much easier to just use a Quen, use an art, so I never really used what little there was in terms of sword mechanics. So, I don't know, I feel I could have balanced it a little bit differently to make sword fighting more, I don't know, rewarding. Just my personal perspective as somebody who, likes to fight with swords. But other than that, I don't really have much issues with the way the combat worked. I feel that a lot of the potions, like I said, were mostly aimed for higher difficulty levels. I really only used the more basic potions, but that is not the problem of the game. That is, because I played on normal for the most part, which I think was fine after a while. There were some weird difficulty spikes earlier in the game, but after a while, I think normal was fine enough. I may have, maybe I would have been able to increase it even more, but I think it probably would have just increased my frustration if I meet a particularly difficult enemy. So I think after a while the difficulty setting was fine the way it is. But yeah, other than that, I don't really have much negative to say about, the gameplay, the combat. The crafting system was okay, the inventory system was okay. I still had to, do a good amount of inventory cleanup every now and then because, of the weight restrictions. But I mean, this is something that you happen to find in almost every RPG that you have to, do some inventory management, and I don't mind that. It's part of the game, and I actually enjoy doing that on from time to time. But yeah, like I said, everything else was pretty smooth, so I don't really know what else I can say about the gameplay in general. So instead, let's talk about the story and the general storytelling. And there are two, I would say, issues that I have with this game in relation to the story and storytelling. I would say overall they are minor issues because they didn't heavily reduce my enjoyment of the game, but I still feel it's worthwhile to talk about them. So, first of all, and this doesn't apply to the entire game, but it does apply to good parts of the game. Sometimes I felt there was very little game in the game. Let me explain what I mean by that. I feel that the makers of the game wanted to go for a very cinematic approach. So when they wrote certain scenes or certain story elements, they wrote them like they would write them for a movie. Of course, the difference between a movie and a game is that if you play a game, you have a certain expectation of interactivity, meaning you want to do something, you want to play the game. And, sometimes in this game I felt like I was, mostly watching and not really playing. And even if I was playing, it felt almost like an illusion of interactivity rather than real, gameplay that I determine myself. So, of course, you had cutscenes, some of them pretty long, but then you had very long stretches of dialogue, and the way the dialogue worked in this game very often was you didn't really have that much of a choice between different things to say. You had a list of options that you could just, go through, pick each option, and then move on to the next part of the conversation. So the only choice you had was between, taking an option and not taking it, and just, skipping it and move on to the next part. But no real, dialogue choices between different things to say. There were those parts where you could, choose different pieces of dialogue, but very often you just, had a list of things to say, and you would just click through them one by one, which kind of makes a dialogue like a cutscene that is, manually advanced by clicking a button, but it felt not very interactive. You were just, going through a list of options, and then the dialogue played out like a cutscene. So this happened fairly often in the game, and I actually noticed that when I made my when I edited my videos. So when I edit the videos, I have, a video track, I have the game audio track, and I have my commentary audio track. And I couldn't help but notice that there were, large stretches of the episode where I barely said anything at all because, I try not to talk over dialogue and I try not to talk during cutscenes. So very often I was just silent watching the game. As a matter of fact, very often I was actually, sitting back with my arms crossed. I didn't even have my hand on the mouse and keyboard anymore because I didn't really have anything to do. And this is okay for a movie, and this is okay for certain types of games, but I feel in an RPG I expect a little bit more interactivity. I mean, there are games that aim to be very cinematic and that have, a linear story and linear movement. I'm thinking about I don't know, Uncharted maybe. I talking about the first game. I haven't actually played the other three, but the first Uncharted game was basically like that, and it was fine. It was a great game, but this is an RPG, and I don't know. I kind of want to do more stuff in an RPG, and like I said, in this game, sometimes it feels like the control was taken away from me, and I was just, clicking, clicking, clicking. Uh, then you had, QuickTime events, which is basically the same, like a cutscene where you click like one or two buttons at times. Or you had those scenes where you were playing somebody else, like Triss or Dandelion or even Prince Dennis for like a whole 10 minutes, which I think is another way the programmers try to, they wanted to avoid a pure cutscene by giving you at least some control. So instead of giving you a very long cutscene between King Hansel and Stannis, they just, gave you control over Stannis to avoid that cutscene. But yeah, I see what they were trying to do there. But it also kind of broke the immersion by, having you play somebody else for 10 minutes. I don't know. I can see why they wouldn't, add that whole sequence as a cutscene, because it would have added to that feeling of, watching a movie instead of playing a game. But I'm not sure if I like the alternative better. It felt immersion breaking to me, to be honest. So yeah, this is probably my main issue with the game, that it very often played too much like a movie, with very limited interaction between, the game and the player. And I think adding to that impression is the fact that the maps are actually kinda limited. I mean, when I look at this map, it looks open worldish, but in reality, you can only walk on, the roads, and everything else is blocked. And I actually, when I discussed the previous game, I mentioned how certain parts of the game had an almost open worldish feel to them, like the swamp or the fields at Murky Waters. It was a small area, but you could, walk everywhere you wanted to walk. So in this aspect, it almost feels like a step backwards, because the maps in this game were almost all, dungeon-like. You only were able to move on certain paths. And that kind of adds to that feeling that you have not as many freedoms as you would probably like to have in an RPG. Because, you are running from one dialogue to the next dialogue, killing a few monsters in between, and you could only walk on very specific pathways. So it felt like a very controlled environment. Now I know that the next game is going to be a true open world game, so at least that aspect is going to be fixed. But it's just something that I noticed about this game, that yeah, there was sometimes a bit too less interactivity. So this is probably my main criticism of the game. But like I said, it was not that big of a deal that it would have seriously diminished my enjoyment of the game. And it would have been fine in any other type of game, but I don't know, when I play an RPG, I expect to actually play the character and have more freedom to play them and how to play the character. And another thing that I guess I would like to discuss is the story as a whole. Because if I compare this story to the story of the previous game, I think I may actually enjoy the story of The Witcher 1 a little bit more, because it felt more focused. I feel that in The Witcher 1 I always knew how the things that I was doing would, bring me closer to my goal, which was, to find Salamandra and to dismantle Salamandra and to find other Javed and stuff like that. I mean, even if when you were gallivanting around the outskirts of Vizima, trying to get into the city, you still had to deal with Salamandra because they were already in that place. So it felt focused on your objective. And when you were in Vizima and doing the murder investigation, all of that had some direct connection to Salamandra. So it felt more focused on your objective. And even those, quest lines that seemed like they didn't really have anything to do with the main objective, like the whole thing about Alvin, eventually turned out to be important for that as well. So it just feels that the story was more condensed to a certain narrative and just, like I said, more focused on the ultimate goal. In this game, however, well, I guess the objective was to find the Kingslayer, but, during a large part of the game, that didn't really seem to be an issue at all anymore. I was just doing stuff that was utterly unrelated to that. I was, hanging around Flotsam trying to fight the Karen. And then I was at Vergen fighting for the independence of the Ponta Valley, none of which had direct relationship to my goal. It was just, a means to an end. I had to fight the Karen to, be able to move on and leave Flotsam. I had to help Vergen defend against Henselt because, again, I just needed to move on and I wanted to, find the Kingslayer, but it didn't really relate to that. So I sometimes just felt I was, thrown into an entirely different story that didn't really have much to do with my original story. And I feel that's also one of the reasons why in the end I decided to kill Letho, because he just wasn't, and I'm sure that some people will disagree with that, but to me he just wasn't that interesting of a character, because he barely featured in the game at all. Most of the time he was just somewhere away from, the main story, and I was doing completely other stuff, and finding the Kingslayer was almost like an afterthought. So when I finally met him, and now it starts to rain, oh well. So when I finally met him, I felt I should at least, give that part of the story some weight by, actually fighting him and not just letting him go, now that we finally found him after 40 episodes. So, yeah, I don't know, Letho as a character, I don't know, could have been more interesting. Maybe I would have saved his life then, but the way it was, I felt I just wanted to have a nice, decent ending to the story and not, an anticlimactic, oh, I'm just going to let you go now. So, yeah, I'm sorry for everyone who wanted me to spare Letho. I just really didn't feel anything for him. He wasn't, to me, interesting or sympathetic enough to let him live. I mean, if you think about it, he basically confessed that he plunged the entire North into chaos, handing it over to the Nilfgaardians on a silver plate, also facilitating a witch hunt, not just against the conspirators, but against all mages. And his reason was that he wanted to rebuild his witches' school and give his friends a home. Aww. Honestly, I felt that was a little bit of a, weak reason. I somehow expected more. I don't know. I don't know what I expected. But I thought that Letho's ultimate reason for doing what he did, which was quite a lot, felt, weak. Maybe more understandable if I had known him better as a character, but since you don't really interact with him throughout the game, it's kinda hard to get to know him. So yeah, Letho is dead now, and I can't say I feel sorry for it. As a matter of fact, I found characters like Philippa Eilhart or Sheila de Tanzaville more interesting than Lethal because you actually interacted with them and you learned more about their motives and so on. So I don't regret the fact that they survived the game because I don't know, I found them more interesting, both as a character or as a enemy because eventually they kind of turn out to be enemies. So yeah, I don't know. Sorry, Lethal, but you just didn't really convince me with your motives. um, Speaking of characters, I was also slightly surprised at the fact that, um, despite me picking Yorveth path, I felt that Yorveth actually featured very little in the story, not as much as I would have expected. I mean, he was there, but he didn't really seem to be that important. So that was kind of surprising, and I wonder how this will be on the Roach path if Roach is more important for that story than Yorveth was for the Yorveth story. Because in the end, you know, beginning with chapter 2, it was mostly about Philippa Eilhart and Saskia and so on, and Yorveth was just kind of there and helping every now and then, but he didn't get as much character development as I expected. Um, and I don't know, maybe a few words on the story as such. Like I said, I felt it was a little bit unfocused at times. That doesn't mean that it was bad. I mean, on its own, the story and the parts of the story were pretty interesting. Mm, I think that, however, some of these side stories were even more interesting than the main plot. One thing that I specifically enjoyed was everything that had to do with the Wild Hunt and Geralt's past and Yennefer and finding out more about that. I liked that part a lot more than the whole political aspect of the story. And there was a lot of politics in the story. And I feel that the political main plot didn't really end that surprising. So yeah, okay, so Nilfgaard was involved. I mean, that was kinda to be expected, and the fact that the Sorcerer's Lodge was shady was pretty obvious early on as well, so it wasn't really that surprising to find out that, okay, Nilfgaard was responsible, and the sorcerers were planning something as well, and Letho basically just played them all. It was an interesting story, but it was not the big plot twist and reveal like we had in the first game. However, the really interesting developments I feel were, in the story aspect that dealt with the Wild Hunt. I feel that we got some very interesting and surprising and unexpected information in that regard. So that's really the reason why I enjoyed the story the most. And I spoke about this earlier already. Um, I'm playing a fantasy game, so I really enjoy those parts of the game that deal with the fantasy and the mystery and the secrets of this world. And whenever you have a quest that kind of investigates these parts of the lore, I'm definitely more interested in that than the politics. And so I would say that maybe there was a little bit too much politic in the main story, whereas the mystery and the secrets were kind of hidden in the side stories. However, I happen to know that the next game has the subtitle The Wild Hunt, so I expect some developments on that account as well, and I hope that we get to know more about the Wild Hunt, because I felt that the revelations in regards to the Wild Hunt, being elves from a different world, I think that was really interesting, and I really want to yeah, find out more about that, and let the kings be kings and fight their wars. But that's what really interests me, and I'm pretty sure I will be able to learn more about this in the next game. Yeah, this is my main thoughts about the story. So it was a good story, but for my personal taste, the focus was too much on the politics and too little on you know the mysteries involving this world and Geralt's past. So I hope to see more of that in the next game. Okay, I don't know what else can I say. Like I said, I felt that most of the flaws of the previous game have been fixed. Um, for example, the voice acting was definitely better. Um, there were a few characters that were kind of off. For example, I thought that Saskia's voice actress was not that good, but for the most part, the voice actors did a good job. Obviously, the dialogue itself had improved. It wasn't a bad translation anymore, but actually written in English, I suppose, or just translated better. So I suspect we will have at least the same quality in the next game. And yeah, I don't know. This is probably my major thoughts about the game. Like I said, I may have spoken about may have spoken a lot about my problems with the game now, but this is on a very high level. I think this was a great game. I enjoyed it a lot, and I'm looking forward to replay it on Roach's Pass, which is why I have this specific save. And I hope that by playing Roach's Path, I will be able to understand the story more, maybe see more of the differences and how the paths diverge, and how maybe the end result is different if I pick different options. If you only play a game once, even if you have options and choices and decisions, it always feels kind of linear because you only play one storyline. But by replaying the game and trying different choices, I think you can appreciate the non-linear aspects of the game. So I am looking forward to that. However, I will play The Witcher 3 first, and after that I will come back to this game and side with Roach instead of Yorveth and see how this will look like. So yeah, I I think this is more or less all I want to say about this. Um, like I said, we will start the first episode of The Witcher 3 on Saturday at the usual time. And yeah, I'm very excited because this game certainly gave a nice setup for the next game, and I can't wait to see how this will turn out. So I hope you enjoyed my Let's Play, and I hope you will be following my next Let's Play as well. So thank you for watching, and see you then.